Hello and welcome back to Archetype Builds. This is our class ranking series where we rank every subclass according to how well it fits the 7 roles of the party. Those roles being the Frontline, the Beatdown, the Investigator, the Infiltrator, the Negotiator, the Support, and the Utility. If you're wondering how I define those roles and how I'm making these determinations, you should really check out my introductions video where I go through all of that. Today we're talking about Druid subclasses, and we have to start with the Druid of Dreams. The Druid of Dreams at 2nd level, when you get this subclass, is getting Balm of the Summer Court. Really leaning on that kind of like Feywild energy that the Druid is tapping into. Balm of the Summer Court is just going to give you some D6s that you can use to heal people. Sort of a non-spell class feature healing thing. It's fairly flexible. I think that that's good. It's very helpful. Druid did have some healing spells, but sometimes with Druid you really want to conserve those spell slots for utility things, or for being able to have those like great concentration effects up combat after combat. So it's nice to be able to rely on Balm of the Summer Court for some of that baseline healing. The healing is not very high, but probably about a healing word's worth each time you use one of these D6s. Your 6th level feature, Hearth of Moon and Shadow, is essentially going to put a protective barrier around your long rest so that you don't need to worry about getting ambushed for the most part when you long rest. It says you're behind total cover, stuff can't get in or out, you've got a +5 bonus to stealth checks inside that zone. It's essentially just some utility and support in like protecting your long rests. I used to think this is sort of a weak high-level feature. Generally speaking, I think if a DM's going to let you get away with a long rest, they'll let you get away with it. And if a DM is not going to let you get away with a long rest, this is going to very frustrate them, right? You like putting up this protective barrier, they're going to make you roll those stealth checks, they're going to like make sure, every hour or so something comes by. So I think the cases where this is helpful are small, and in those cases, I think the cases where it works is smaller. But it is what it is. The 10th level feature, Hidden Pathways, is actually going to give you a bonus action teleport that, again, is a non-spell. So that's actually kind of super useful. You can teleport up to 60 feet to an unoccupied space as a bonus action, which is really, really awesome. Or you can touch someone else and teleport them up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space you can see. Why it's different between you and the person that you're teleporting, I don't know. But this is really great mobility and teleportation. We are at 10th level, so people have the spell Dimension Door, but I think the ability to do this without needing to have a spell is neat and good, useful mobility. It's not unlimited, so you do have a number of uses equal to your Wisdom modifier, which hopefully is high. By 10th level, you're probably looking at a +4 or +5. That's a decent number of times per day, and I think it's nifty, especially for that kind of like maybe more out of combat, like going to the top of the cliff or crossing the gorge or kind of thing. Walker in Dreams is a complicated feature, so let's break it down. What Walker in Dreams is going to let you do is, after you finish a short rest, you're going to get a free use of a spell. Which spell? Well, it's either Dream, with you as the messenger, Scrying, or Teleportation Circle. And the Teleportation Circle has a fixed destination, which is the last place you took a long rest. The result is this strange set of abilities that you have now, which each are fairly niche in their own terms, but combined, I think, make for a useful feature. So first of all, Dream is probably the weakest of them all. This is a spell that I'll put here and you can read to your heart's content. It's a wild spell. That essentially lets you like change someone's dream and then give them a message and talk to them. Just take sending. But like, you could use this to go talk to someone who's asleep somewhere in the world. Scrying, I think, with these lack of limitations on it and being a free 5th level spell is great. And then the Teleportation Circle, it seems restrictive to say that it only takes you to the last place you short rested, kind of like an autosave. In general, often when you are using teleportation circles, you're looking to travel, a long distance across the continent, so you can't do that. You're looking to advance to the next stage of the adventure. You can't do that. But it is a consistent and useful way of saying, like, hey, this is maybe too much for us, or hey, we have the MacGuffin, let's get out of here. And it kind of covers your retreat, or it helps you to, kind of abandon ship on some adventure that's not going well. Now, you need to have taken a short rest, right? So it's not a mid-combat escape button. But certainly maybe if you've only just barely survived the last combat and you know there's something more dangerous up ahead, it might be a good ability to kind of say, like, hey, we need to regroup and try this again. So overall, I think that the bonuses to support, right, with supporting the long rest and supporting with healing, are decent, and it kind of lends itself in that direction. And I think it's got some strong utility features. Next, we have Druid of the Land. Druid of the Land is such a classic subclass. So you're going to get to pick the land that you are from, and it's going to give you a spell list that is specific to you. That's very cool. I've done some builds with Circle of the Land Druids because that kind of customizability is just so fantastic. And then they've got Natural Recovery, which is just like the Wizard's Arcane Recovery, where you are restoring spell slots equal to, some ratio of your Druid level. So that's very good. You're casting more spells as a Land Druid than pretty much any other Druid, which is great. Unfortunately, the land spells are kind of a mixed bag, and then you're not getting a new feature until Land Stride at 6th level. Land Stride essentially says you don't have to worry about non-magical difficult terrain, and you can pass through plants without being slowed or taking damage from them. This is pretty situational, and it's also very unfortunate to see that, like a desert druid or like an ice arctic druid or a coastal druid is focused on plants, right? Because that's not really what you would expect to see. So this feature is relatively niche and situational, and it doesn't necessarily give your group the same ability to pass through that difficult terrain. So I would say this kind of doesn't count towards anything. Keep in mind as well that Natural Recovery, while a good feature, like, don't get me wrong, is nice, is not strong enough to bump it up in any given category. Neither are the spell lists, and neither is the 6th level feature. So we don't really have to continue to 14th level to say that the Land Druid is just the vanilla baseline Druid, but we will. Nature Sanctuary, when you reach 14th level, creatures of the natural world sense your connection to nature and become hesitant to attack you. So a beast or a plant creature attacks you, they have to make a wisdom save against your Druid spell save DC. And on a failed save, they choose a different target. So they don't stop attacking, they just choose a different target. And if they succeed, then they're immune to this effect for 24 hours. So this is situational. I'm sure there are campaigns that make heavy use of beasts and plants, but you know what those campaigns all have in common? They don't make it to 14th level! The Land Druid really is not going to sway us in any given direction. I love the flavor of the Land Druid. I love the flavor of choosing that environment and having that spell list and customizability. I think undeniably, from a power perspective, it is nothing. Alright, so Moon Druids. This is probably a Druid subclass you're familiar with. Everybody talks about the Moon Druid all the time because the Moon Druid is making use of this wild shape feature for Druids for combat purposes. And to that end, they are going to get Circle Forms, which is going to increase the CR of the beast that they can select up to something that's actually quite good. Right at 2nd level, that's going to let you do a CR1 creature. And if you make it to 6th level, that's CR2, and then CR3 at 9th, 4 at 12th, 5 at 15th, etc. Usually the Moon Druid is saving those wild shape uses for combat, to gain those extra hit points, gain all of that extra attack power, and be highly resilient. Firstly, I'll say the additional hit points granted by such strong creatures is significant enough to look at this as a powerful baseline. Is significant enough to look at this as a powerful frontline option, right? It's not that you are drawing the enemy's attention to you most often or incentivizing them to attack you, but if you just throw yourself into the middle of things and are giving yourself an extra 25, 50 hit points with these wild shapes, that in and of itself can be very powerful. Now, beasts rarely have an armor class that's competitive with like a player character wearing armor, but we do have to say that like, especially at these lower levels when these forms are comparatively stronger, doubling, tripling your base hit points, that's got to count for something. You're also getting Combat Wild Shape, which makes Wild Shape a bonus action, so you can get started right in the beginning of combat, and it allows you to expend spell slots for a relatively inefficient self-heal. What this seems to speak to is a frontliner that's replenishing their own health, using these spell slots to kind of like keep you in Wild Shape for as long as possible. At 6th level, your strikes are counting as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance. Gosh, I am looking forward to 1D&D when this magical damage tax is taken away, but a must-have if you're going to play this type of character in 5th edition. At 10th level, you're going to get the option to expend 2 uses of Wild Shape to turn into an elemental rather than your beasts. Now remember, we're still below the cap of what beasts can turn into, right? Here at 10th level, we've just gotten the option to turn into CR3 creatures. You're kind of exchanging 2 CR3 creatures for an elemental. Generally, this is worth it for the big battles, because these elementals are significantly stronger than your beast forms, and they've got well-rounded defensive and offensive abilities, including some like area of effect or like multiple target damaging effects, these like recharge abilities, and resistances to very common damage types. Lastly, at 14th level, the Moon Druid kind of slips in 1,000 forms. You've learned to use the Alter Self spell at will. Alter Self has some interesting uses, but at this high of a level, that's quite disappointing. The other thing that's good is I weight features more heavily for early levels than late levels, because I understand how D&D usually works. So if the Moon Druid was going to falling off at this 14th level is the way to go. Overall, the Moon Druid is going to give you the ability to make great use of this Wild Shape for frontline survival, taking it to an A. It's going to be able to deal consistent damage in the melee in this Wild Shape, and then also make use of its spells, because those weren't expended, when it's not Wild Shaped. So the combination of spellcasting damage potential with Wild Shape damage potential, I think does make this pretty good in terms of beatdown. The one thing this really draws away from is your Investigator or Infiltrator points and your support. The reason why is because when you want a support class is during combat. And while you're in combat as a Moon Druid, you're almost certainly in your Wild Shape, not able to cast spells. So while you can have a concentration spell up on the battlefield that like continues to do things, and I highly recommend that you do play like that, it's going to be very difficult for a Moon Druid to serve as your party's support, even if they have the spell lists for it, because when you're needed, you're not available. The other thing is you're conserving your uses of Wild Shape for battle. Those are very valuable uses of Wild Shape now that you can turn into greater and greater creatures, and you've sunk some class abilities into improving it. So, if your party's like, can someone turn into a little cat and like run into the enemy camp and investigate it, you're probably not going to raise your hand because you don't want to squander your Wild Shape on something like that. So Moon Druid is actually going to go up in Frontline and Beatdown and go down in Infiltration and Support. Next we have the Shepherd Druid. The Shepherd is all about animals and animal companions, and specifically like a mass of animals, right? Your herd, your group or flock. You're going to get Speech of the Woods, which is going to allow you to speak, read, and write Sylvan, and then also beasts can understand your speech, and you can kind of decipher their noises and motions as well. So speak with animals is just baseline for you. You're also at 2nd level going to get your Spirit Totem, which is really exciting and a kind of a unique feature and mechanic in the game of D&D. You're placing this ephemeral spirit, which acts as like an object in space, but it is not physical. You can't interact with it. You can't kick it and knock it over. You can choose between the Bear Spirit, Hawk Spirit, and Unicorn Spirit, and each has different benefits for all of the creatures around it, making you great with like large party synergy, or even with parties that have a lot of like companions or pets that they've picked up along the way. If you are playing with a kind of a smaller group, there's options that are better for that. The Hawk Spirit is going to grant only one creature advantage on their attack roll, whereas if you're in a large group, the Bear Spirit is going to boost everybody with temporary hit points. At 6th level, you're getting Mighty Summoner, which is going to give you both the magical damage from any creatures that you summon, and it's going to give them additional hit points when summoned. So that's increasing their tankiness and damage. The next thing you're going to get from a Shepherd Druid is the Guardian Spirit feature. This essentially adds additional survivability to your summons. When they end their turn in your totem's radius, they're going to regain hit points. Let's pause here at 10th level and ask, what is the Shepherd Druid doing? The Shepherd Druid is summoning creatures, usually with Conjure Beasts, which summons a large number of creatures. They are doing magical damage. They are getting bonuses from your Spirit Totem as far as their survivability, as well as from Mighty Summoner. So essentially what it's doing is it's making these very large pool of hit points very survivable and continuously kind of like buffing them up. Now, Conjure Animals has a bit of reputation amongst the D&D community as being one of the highest DPR spells in the game. So everything that this is pointing you to, even though these are survivability features for the creatures, right, it is making that damage more sustained. Because, of course, you are not the one taking that damage. Your creatures are, and if they die, your DPR is falling off. So the features here speak to someone who is using the strongest DPR spell in the game, and ensuring the success of that spell and that damage consistently over a long combat. So it's definitely frontline potential, right? You don't have to be the one taking the damage to be a good frontliner, but it's also very high damage potential, right? So this kind of puts us in the realm of the Moon Druid when you think about it. So when we move on to 14th level and we see Faithful Summons, which essentially at 14th level, when you are reduced to 0 hit points, you immediately get a Conjure Animals who appear. It's cast as if you're using a 9th level spell slot, which is crazy high. They appear within 20 feet of you, and they protect you from attacks. It requires no concentration. This is bonkers, right? But it's sort of tangential to what we are doing. Yes, you are getting your Conjure Animals. Yes, this is very good for, like, if you go down, making sure you don't die outright. But at the end of the day, this is not a feature that you're using consistently. This is a feature that is a backup option. So looking at our first 3 features, high survivability for conjured creatures, some great options in Conjure Animals, which is intrinsically linked to this class, for high amounts of damage coming from that spell. Overall, I'm going to say that this is just absolutely phenomenal in those 2 categories. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say that this is one of the most consistently powerful damage dealers in the game. It's so subtle. It's so subtle because none of the features speak to the actual dealing of damage. But if you're a druid and you're taking Conjure Animals and you're using that effectively, the one thing you want to make sure that you can do is ensure that those animals aren't dying by the dozen from like a breath attack or being like knocked out one by one and your damage is tapering off. The Shepherd Druid addresses that concern directly and says, my damage will not be reduced to the degree that other spellcasters' damage will be reduced. So I think, just speaking from a novice player's perspective, like someone who is just joining the game and wants to be pointed to, like, how do I do a bunch of damage? A Shepherd Druid using Conjure Animals, just unleashing that like magical damage and with those resilient creatures, might be S tier. I really think we should consider the possibility that this is an S tier damage subclass. Open to arguments in the comments. Now we're going to talk about the Circle of Spores. This is such a cool subclass that I love so much, and I just wish it were good. I really do. because I would use it way more often. I have lots of build ideas with Circle of Spores Druids, and I just never want to play them because I know it's not going to go that well. Let's talk about it. So you're getting some circle spells here that are all related to debuffing the enemy, like necroses, like undeath. But you've just got some weird ones in here. I mean, you do have Animate Dead. You have Gaseous Forn, Gentle Repose. So it's a good spell list, but it's kind of all over the map in terms of role. Then you're getting your Halo of Spores, which does damage to enemies when they get close to you. How much damage? A d4 of damage. So this is if you had a way of concentrating enemies on you, like you can do this with like Thorn Whip, right? You can pull an enemy closer to you, and then they take this damage. It's a useful like frontline beatdown hybrid feature, but the numbers are just too low. They get a save every time they are taking this damage. So overall, that is a pretty weak feature all around. You are going to get Symbiotic Entity. Symbiotic Entity allows you to use a use of your wild shape in order to supercharge that Halo of Spores. So it's going to do double the damage. You roll twice the die, and then you also, when you hit someone with an attack, you're going to deal an extra 1d6 necrotic damage every time you hit. So this is now speaking to okay, I understand that what the class is driving me towards is a damage-dealing melee druid. So here's the problem with the damage-dealing melee druid. They're not good. You've basically got to, you're switching to a shillelagh, to quarterstaff, making one attack per turn because you're a druid, right? And we're not talking about multi-classing in this series. I think this is perhaps the most slept on multi-class synergy druid subclass, but that's not what we're talking about in this series. So when we talk about just the Spores druid, what I see here is it wants to deal damage, but it deals very little damage. At 6th level, we're getting Fungal Infestation. This is an ability that allows you to infest a corpse and animate it. So it's like Animate Dead. You are going to use the zombie stat block in the monster manual. Remains animate for 1 hour. So it's not a spell, but it acts like a spell, and you are going to animate a zombie out of a corpse. It kind of is your little companion. It's going to follow on your initiative and take the attack action when you order it to, and all that kind of stuff. It's your boy, your little zombie boy. Which I guess deals extra damage and keeps you alive because the zombie is, taking some hits. But, God, it's such a strange choice for the class. I guess you can use this in conjunction with Animate Dead to pull up a bunch of undead minions and send them out, and then if anyone gets close to you, they take spores damage, I guess. Spreading Spores is meant to be a kind of utility damage feature. What it allows you to do is take the aura of spores that surrounds you and to channel it to a different location. So you are throwing it into a doorway or a corridor or a canyon pass, somewhere that is going to be a choke point for enemies. And when they enter your aura, they're going to take your Halo of Spores damage, but now you don't have to be there for that to happen. Better, right? It's better than being a kind of control-y spellcaster druid with an army of undead that wants enemies to get close to them. I'm glad we're not doing that. But it is at 10th level, which is pretty late. And it, again, is just your Halo of Spores damage, which even if you've activated your Symbiotic Entity is 2d8 at this level. It's just not high enough to justify any of this. And again, if you are going to be at a distance, which I think is a good idea, I think that probably the optimal play here with Spores Druid is just be a spellcaster, and then, this Spores stuff is a backup, right? Which means you're not getting the second benefit from your Symbiotic Entity, which is the extra necrotic damage on a hit. So, yeah. It's disappointing. It's disappointing in that regard. Fungal Body is our 14th level feature. You can't be blinded, deafened, frightened, poisoned, and you negate critical hits unless you're incapacitated. Yes, I mean, as a spellcaster, we don't want to be blinded. We don't want to be poisoned or frightened. Like, these are good things. But does it help our damage? No. Does it really help our utility? No. Is it even making us like a good tank in some way? No. So it doesn't count towards anything. So this remains a kind of a weak damage dealer, but I do have to note that just like with Moon Druid, we want our wild shapes for our symbiotic entities. We probably don't. Like, we probably are going to forego the use of symbiotic entity, the class feature. But, like, a new player being steered into this is going to see these features and be tempted to use them in combat, because they are going to increase the damage dealt, and they're one of the only ways that Spores Druids get to do that. So, if you build around this class's features, if you like try to make a Spores Druid work, you want your symbiotic entity, and in which case you're not using it for infiltration, which is what we gave ourselves such a good score in infiltration in. Unlike the Moon Druid, we can cast spells while we are activating our symbiotic entity, so it remains, the right tier of support, but it is going to go down in infiltration, and it's not going to go up in any respect, including damage, because Druid's damage was coming from their powerful spells, from their walls of fire, from their conjure animals. And your Halo of Spores rarely is going to help you to do that. Circle of Stars! I'm excited about this because I know at least one viewer of the channel is playing a Circle of Stars Druid in my campaign starting, well, it will have already started by the time this comes out. So they are playing a Circle of Stars Druid in my campaign. So I've done a lot of analysis on Circle of Stars Druid to make sure I'm prepared for what he might throw at me, and what a nifty class. Let's talk about it. So firstly, you're getting some bonus stuff. You're getting Guidance, the cantrip, which I think is one of the best cantrips in the game, specifically because its out-of-combat utility is amazing, and the fact that it's a cantrip, so you can like kind of spam it whenever, is so extremely useful in an out-of-combat scenario, because you don't want to blow, a resource, but just throwing Guidance on a lot of skill checks is something that is easy to do and is this huge boost to your party. So already, thumbs up. But you could have taken Guidance. It's also going to give you the Guiding Bolt spell, which is a great spell. It does amazing damage, it's radiant damage, and it gives advantage on the next attack against your opponent. Good spell. Having it automatically on your spell list is great. Also, you can cast Guiding Bolt a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus without expending the spell slot, which is crazy. So you're just getting a bunch of extra Guiding Bolts, which is a good spell. And it would be worth the spell slot, but you don't even have to spend it on that. So that's really good as well. And that's like the ribbon feature. It's good, and it's the ribbon feature on this Druid. The main feature is Starry Form. Starry Form is going to give you 3 new forms when you wild shape. It's going to allow you to take on the form of either an archer, a chalice, or a dragon. The archer is your damage form. It's going to allow you to make attack rolls as a bonus action, dealing 1d8 plus your wisdom modifier on a hit. It's radiant damage, which is useful for a couple of different situations, and just being able to weaponize your bonus action so effectively and consistently is really, really cool. The other thing is, because it's an attack roll, it works well with Guiding Bolt. You can Guiding Bolt as your action, and then this Starry Form Archer's thing is not a spell, so you can bonus action with it and get advantage. And it's just pretty good for consistent damage output. I would say that, no one is accusing the Stars Druid Archer of being, top tier of the charts in damage, but I think it's an incredible A-tier damage dealer because it's so easy to do and it has such a easy rotation to swing into. And that's just the first form. The Chalice is going to blast additional HP when you cast a healing spell. So it's magnifying the use of your healing spells, similar to the way a Life Cleric would, right? So if you like life clerics, you should love Stars Druids because they have that, but it's just one of their options. They get to do a lot of other stuff besides that. And lastly, the dragon is going to help you maintain your Constitution saving throws to maintain a spell. You basically treat any roll below a 9 as a 10, which, if you've got a decent Constitution modifier, means you're almost always making your concentration saves on spells, right? They have to do a lot of damage to prevent that. Druid being probably the best class in the game, Druid and Wizard, right? The best classes in the game for laying down a control utility spell that's concentration based at the start of combat to significantly change the battlefield and change the terms of the battle. So being able to just dragon up and maintain concentration on that spell even as you're getting, attacked by arrows and enemy spells and stuff like that, crazy useful, right? So, and it's important to mention that you choose each time you wild shape. So you've got all these different options available. You can decide what role in the party you're filling that particular day, what's needed, what will be helpful, and you can adapt accordingly, which I love. But one thing we do have to say is, just like in these other Druid subclasses, the fact that you are not using your wild shape uses for infiltration in order to spare them for combat does decrease your infiltration potential. Notice none of these starry forms are that, and it's a big opportunity cost now to use your wild shape for infiltration. So you are going to pay the tax there, but I think these forms are universally some really powerful forms for very particular roles in the group. You're getting your Cosmic Omen at level 6, which is going to basically roll a die, end of a long rest, and then you get this persistent effect based on whether the die was odds or evens. Essentially, it's like a reaction Bardic Inspiration D6 if it's wheel, and then it's like a reaction like Bane, like reduce your opponent's saving throw if it's woe, right? So really good, like just general like support ability here. It's not going to cost a resource. It's just using your reaction when your allies or enemies do stuff, and lets you have this like subtle resourceless effect on the battlefield and on the adventure that has a little fun randomness component to it. Twinkling Constellation is going to boost your numbers on your starry forms, which is so helpful because we hate features that don't scale as you level up, and this at least allows you to sort of like step into the second tier of play with appropriately sized numbers. And lastly, Full of Stars is going to give you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage while you're in your starry form. Any starry form, which is of course a great frontline feature, but comes along too late to secure us a frontline change in classification. This is Tomorrow Thomas because my camera ran out of battery before I could record about the Wildfire Druid. So, the Wildfire Druid is a fascinating damage support hybrid subclass. Let's get into it. Your circle spells are going to include a mix of fire damage and heal. You're going to get things like Burning Hands, Cure Wounds, Flaming Sphere, Scorching Ray, Plant Growth, Revivify, Aura of Life, Fire Shield, Flame Strike, and Mass Cure Wounds. This speaks to the damage and restoration aspect of the Wildfire Druid. And they get Summon Wildfire Spirit right at 2nd level. This is a signature ability of the class, and it allows you to expend one use of your wild shape to create a Wildfire Spirit. The Spirit is essentially going to have some statistics that are based on your stats, like your proficiency bonus and wisdom. Mainly a damage combat pet, does some AoE damage around it when you summon it, and when it takes its little teleport action. So this is going to increase our damage output because we are consistently getting some extra damage, and don't forget that druids have some pretty good damaging spells, and the Wildfire Druid is definitely no exception with its list of fire damage spells on its class spell list. Add on to that this little guy that's just dealing a little bit of extra damage every turn, and I think you can consistently do some pretty good damage, and your ability to do area of effect damage, which has these, it's very swingy depending on the combat, right? If there's a lot of targets, it can skyrocket. If there's not very many targets, it can kind of drop down below baseline. But I think that your capacity to do that kind of damage does make you an A tier damage dealer. At 6th level, you're getting Enhanced Bond. So you and your little guy have an Enhanced Bond now. This is going to increase both the destructive power and restorative power of your spells. So you're going to add an additional D8 while your Wildfire Spirit is up, and add it to either the damage or healing of your spellcasting. This also allows you to place the spell coming from either you or your Wildfire Spirit, which can actually be very helpful in different positioning tactics. This is a feature that's a little bit more difficult to quantify, but it is strong utility for very niche situations where you might need to be in different places. It's one of those things where the odds that you need to use this for any given scenario are low, but the number of scenarios are high enough that this is a solid feature. Cauterizing Flames is a strange ability that essentially creates a little fire spirit on top of a creature that has died within 30 feet. This is a passive ability. It doesn't require your reaction. It just happens when something dies near you or your Wildfire Spirit. The resulting thing, when someone else enters the space, you can either deal damage or heal for a set amount. It's 2d10 plus your Wisdom modifier. 2d10 plus your Wisdom modifier is actually pretty good. At 10th level, I would hope you'd be close to capping out your Wisdom, so we can go ahead and call this like 10 damage or healing on average, and that's quite good, especially as sort of like a passive feature. You do have to use your reaction to deal the damage or the healing when someone enters that space, but I think this is a nifty use of your reaction in a class that honestly doesn't need their reaction that much for anything else besides like absorb elements. At 14th level, Blazing Revival essentially allows the Wildfire Spirit to give its life to restore yours, which is nifty for keeping you alive and make sure that Wildfire Spirit is never going to just disappear, right? If you get knocked out, your Wildfire Spirit, of course, would go away as well. But with this, now when you get knocked out, it's not going away for nothing. A little bit of added utility and survivability to this class. I should note it immediately regains you to half hit points, which is quite high for a resurrection ability. So what we're seeing here is a class that is a pretty good damage dealer, has very strong support, and is overall relatively survivable in and of itself. I like the Wildfire Druid a lot. I think it's quite a potent class. Obviously, you are going to have to pay that tax on using your wild shape for this different thing, this Wildfire Spirit, but I don't think you're too upset about that. Overall, Druids have one of my strongest baselines. I think it's Druids and Bards have the best core classes in the game. They're also classes that are blessed with some amazing subclasses. So way up there in my book. I think when you really look at the Druid, what you see from their subclasses is a tendency to focus strongly on their full spellcasting, a tendency to see the use of a control concentration spell with some generic, kind of abilities for survival and support and damage being thrown in. And I really love to see that. It's the flexibility of the Druid, the ability to play to the circumstance that is arising, that is its greatest strength. And so I think that the classes that give you more real-time options for what to do are the ones that are going to shine here in the Druid. You'll notice really very low in terms of like S-tier classes. And generally that's because the Druid subclasses are focusing on things that the Druid was getting a B in. That being frontlining, right, survivability, damage dealing, and support. There are certainly classes that will jump in and add a little bit of extra utility, but the baseline Druid has such utility that it is difficult to bump from that to an S. I hope this deep dive has been a great look at the Druid, and for you to understand which subclass of Druid you want to play to fill that role in your party. I'll see you in 2 weeks for the Fighter.